on spey casting. It took a long time, but I restored a tape that was done over 30 years ago when spey casting and fishing was really kind of making a resurgence. Jim Vincent, the founder of Rio Lines, did this remarkable first real video on the modern day spey casting. And I wasn't able to get all of it, but enough of it I think you will really enjoy restoring this. Spey casting is wonderful, and the story in fishing is really one that I'm really glad that we can restore. So I hope that you enjoy this, and we're on to the presentation. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year again.
Hey Jim, great to be here at long last.
Yeah, we had a really great class, 16 people here on the Merrimack River.
Went well?
Went well, I thought it went real well. All beginners, we did a lot of the basics.
Yeah, I think they covered it well. They did both banks, both hands, and I think we have a few stars out of that.
So what do you think we're going to be doing in this film? We're going to be showing the Norwegian and Swedish techniques with Leif Stabmo, who will be joining us later.
Yeah.
And then your cast, which is a beautiful cast, that snake roll cast.
Well, we want to go into the snakes, the double spays, the single spays, cover them all. We're going to cover the basics, but some overhead casting. Few videos show the overhead, but I think we need to show some overheads and rolls, some switches.
All right.
Maybe a few single-handed rod casts, because I think you'll find a lot of anglers don't use the single-handed rod with spays.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. What you've been working on with that single-handed is just marvelous. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think we should need to show that later on. But why don't you start? Start off with some overhead casts or something like that.
Sounds like a plan. The overhead cast is just like an overhead cast with a single-handed rod. You want tight loops. You want to make a positive stop. There's drift involved to let it on out. The roll cast is just a dead line roll cast, and that's it. You're bringing the line straight up to 1 o'clock, you're letting it sag, and that's the start of a belly for a spey cast. And then you're kicking it on out. Now watch what happens when I put a little power to it. Live line. Whoa! Now we have a forward spey, or the switch cast. Put a little power in it, let it bounce, and we've got all that power that's joining those three elements together to the spey cast. Simon Gawesworth is now going to show us the elements of all the different spey casts.
You can extend the principles that Jim talked about with the overhead spey and switch into the change of direction casts. And the three casts that are most important, the single spey, the double spey, and the snake roll. The single spey, on this bank, the single spey is a change of direction cast with the left hand. We'll look at them on other banks later on in the video, but on this bank, the left hand up, right foot forward, single spey is a change of direction cast. For details which we'll talk about later on, you have other casts, and the cast that I'm going to show you on this side now is the double spey. The double spey you use, again, when we talk about the double spey, we'll talk about much more detail when to use the double spey. But the principles of the double spey are that you use two movements before your forward stroke. Similar to the single spey, you use it when you've got obstructions behind you, you change direction, but 1, 2, and then the forward stroke to get the cast out. And then the newer of the casts, the one that we were talking about at the beginning of the film, which is the snake roll, again used to change direction, again used in this case on the right hand, and it looks like this. And the snake roll, the advantage of the snake roll is a much quicker change of direction cast, and also you avoid snagging the line on bank and bushes on your left hand side. It's a change of direction, the cast, that works best through some 90 degrees, and the finer the angle, the cast, the less effective it is. So you need to let the line swing right round to the dangle, as though you're fishing, let the line sweep, come up and change direction with the snake roll.
There you have it, the 6 casts all the spey casting we're going to do with a double-handed and a single-handed rod. But Simon, tell us the 3 principles of good spey casting.
Well, Jim, the principles are very, very simple. You have 3, as Jim suggested, 3 principles to follow. The first is to get the biggest belly you can behind you to load the rod for the forward stroke. The second is to get as little line lying in the water as possible. You don't want no line stick. And the third is to get the belly directly opposite where your forward cast is going to go to load the rod to its maximum potential. If you follow those principles, you'll be a master caster.
Right, and those principles are the same for a single-handed rod or a double-handed rod?
Single, double, left hand, left bank, right bank. Everything's the same with all the casts.
Well, we're going to work on the details now.
Let's have a look. Okay. The belly, the first principle of spey casting, is the term we give to the line hanging down behind the rod, which loads the rod for the cast. Now, the more line behind your rod, the more the rod is going to bend backwards, load the rod for the forward stroke, and the less power you need as a caster to get the line out. In this instance, I'll show you a small belly. Here's a very small belly. There's nothing behind the rod really to load it, so what I need is really force the forward cast out. Now, no caster wants to use a lot of power on the cast to get it out. Casting should be effortless. On this guide to spey casting, we're trying to teach you effortless spey casting, and the bigger the belly, and this is the belly going back here, the bigger the belly, the less forward stroke power is needed to get the line out. And you're trying all the time to throw the line back further and further to get the bigger belly. And the further back it goes, the bigger the belly is. There's a real big one there. Now, going back to small bellies, there is a place for a small belly. And this is when you've got obstructions tight to your back. The closer behind you the obstructions are, the smaller your belly has to be, but the more power forward you're going to need to compensate it. So the good caster is somebody who does some big bellies most of the time, but has the ability to cast a small belly when there's trees and obstructions behind them. Looking at a more advanced stage of the belly formation, you've got to get this belly we've already talked about behind you. But one really important tip is the shape of the belly. And we have 2 types of belly. You have the balloon belly, which is a big swirly curved type belly. It can still be a large belly, but the shape of the belly is very, very curved. And as a result of that, it doesn't fire back behind and load the rod in the backstroke. Much more advanced belly is the arrow point or needle belly, where you fire back a very sharp pointed nose to the belly. And of course, like any forward loop, it cuts through the air a lot better and loads the rod more for the forward stroke. Now, the skill is in being able to form this arrow pointed belly. And it's by the flattest of movements of the rod on the backstroke you get it. The flatter the rod moves back, the tighter and sharper the point of the belly, whereas the more curve you have in the rod like this, the more balloon shape you have to the belly. And a balloon belly, although it may be big, has no velocity and no momentum to load the rod. The second principle of spey casting we mentioned was something called stick. Now, stick is just a term that we give the line when it's lying literally stuck in the surface film of the water. Now, the more line there is lying stuck in this surface film, the more effort is needed on the forward stroke to tear it out of that thick skin. And this is all down to timing. A good caster will hit the forward stroke before more than a couple of foot of line has landed. And this is perhaps the most important principle of the spey cast, is that you get that forward stroke going as the line kisses the water. The longer the pause, the worse the result, because the line is stuck in that surface film. And the only real way to get around this problem is to turn your head and watch the line, and then you know when to go forward. If you're watching it, you can see the line touch, and then you go forward. If you don't watch it, you haven't a clue, you guess, and invariably, you're going to get it wrong. This stick is something you can hear. Use your ears. If you do a bad cast, you will hear a great amount of spray as the line tries to break the surface film, and you'll see a great white mouse-type spray breaking the surface film. Now, that is all wasted energy. A good caster, if you get the timing right, it will just land and go. You hear nothing, you see nothing. The third principle of spey casting we talked about is the 180-degree principle. This is getting the belly directly opposite where you want your forward stroke to go. It makes work a lot less tiring because the rod loads and goes exactly where you want the forward stroke to fire it. The problem will arise, and this particularly so with the Spey casts, which are change of direction casts, when you go back this way and try to go forward over there. You can see the thing doesn't work. The belly isn't loading the rod. So what you need to do is make sure that the belly goes back one direction and forward 180 degrees to it. Let's take a closer look at why that happens. This can easily be seen by threading a line up a piece of rod, bending the rod back one direction and letting the line go. The natural energy and spring of the rod will try and fire the line 180 degrees from where you pull the line. I've pulled it this way, the rod and line wants to fire it that way. And that is why, when you're Spey casting, it's so important to get the belly directly opposite where you want the forward stroke to end up. Now let's go down to the water and see that in reality. Let's take a look back at the rod and you'll see exactly how that principle works again. By getting that rod 180 degrees to the target, the belly 180 degrees to the target, all the load is going to be taken up by the rod and not the caster. You can be the gentlest of forward strokes and the line will go out without you working too hard. And after all, that's what casting is all about, not you working hard. But just whilst we're on the subject of 180 degree principle, you'll see a lot of casters sometimes have to cast off the wrong shoulder. And some guides and instructors tell you to cast backhanded or cack-handed as we call it. And the problem with this is the cast and the rod is not 180 degrees. You can see the rod from your left shoulder cuts across to the right hand side and you lose an awful lot of energy. It's far better to do this with a left hand because then the 180 degree principle is obeyed. The arm and the rod travels 180 degrees and the belly goes 180 degrees to the cast. So in summary, the three principles, the big belly or D-loop, the small amount of line sticking in the water, and the 180 degrees line and rod to where you want your forward stroke to go. And if you master those three principles, you're well on your way to becoming a very, very good Spey caster. But there are two other things we need to look at, and that is the stance and the grip. The stance is obviously how you stand. Now the most important thing about your stance is that you're going to be safe and you're going to be upright and you're going to have balance in the water. But in terms of performance of casting, you want your opposite foot forward to the hand that is in control of the rod. My right hand is in control of the rod here, my left foot is forward. If your left hand is in control of the rod, you want your right foot forward. And that way, when you cast, you can brace on, lean back on the back and lean forward on the forward without any danger of following in. Now, if you look at any form of casting that is like overhead or Spey cast or anything like that, you've got to have this wide stance and the front leg opposite to the hand. Compare that to a sport like javelin throwing or throwing a cricket ball or something like that, and you see every athlete will lean back and brace and come forward using the opposite leg as to the arm they're propelling the ball or the spear with. And Spey casting is no different. You'll seriously impair the performance of your cast by having a right foot forward and a right hand. You can't get your body into the cast, you can't get any natural body momentum into the cast, and likewise left foot forward and left hand. So to recap on stance, you have quite a wide stance and opposite foot forward to the hand that is in control of the rod. Right hand up, left foot forward, left hand up, right foot forward. Perhaps the last thing to look at is the grip, how you hold the rod. Now comfort, like stance, is so important with the grip, but one thing to remember is that you should hold the rod as near the point of balance as possible. That rod balances there, I want my top hand in control of it right there, so I'm not working against the leverage of the rod. And the other key with this grip is to hold your hands as far apart as possible. Top hand up the rod, bottom hand as far down the rod. Doesn't matter if you're right hand up, top hand up the rod, left hand at the bottom. And the reason for this is that when you start the power of the forward cast, you can get a lot of leverage by having your hands so far apart. A number of casters you'll see cast with the hands close like that, and you really work so hard fighting A, the weight of the rod, and B, fighting to get some leverage onto the cast. So you need your hands as far apart as possible to get the stroke out. So that basically covers stance and grip. They're important. Let's see how important they are and put them into the casts, first with a single spey. A competent angler can cast with both left hand and right hand, and you have to do that according to the wind. We should be doing a single spey off this bank today. As I just said to you, we're going to look at the single spey, but the problem with a single spey is you're going to learn a new cast, and this cast is called the duck spey, because with the wind on your left, you're going to be ducking out of every single fly, and that is dangerous. So what you should do when the wind is blowing downstream, the most important thing to remember is you do a double spey, or you can do a snake roll. But when the wind is downstream, for safety's sake, it's a double spey or snake roll, and the wind will blow the line away from you and not into your face. The double spey is a cast that consists of 3 separate stages. When you're learning the double spey, it's much easier to learn each individual stage, and then you'll progress and learn the cast a lot quicker than trying to do the whole thing at once. But let's look at the 3 stages and see what they are. Stage 1 is a very simple movement. You start with a line tight downstream. The rod tip starts about 10 o'clock, quite dead. The rod comes over your head and puts the line down and the rod down low on your upstream shoulder. And I'll tell you why in a minute. Stage 2, the rod comes round flat, lifts up here, the belly forms behind you, and then stage 3 would be the forward stroke. Now if you look at each of the stages and perhaps 1 or 2 things that are important about them, this stage 1, the key to this stage 1 is getting the line as close to you as possible. A cast where the line lands as far away from you as 20 feet away from your body means that when you complete the cast, you're automatically going to have, say, 20 foot of stick on the water, and we've already discussed the problems of stick and how little stick you want. So the key to this double spey, really, the sort of the hot tip of the first stage, is to let the line land as near to you as possible. Second stage, throw the belly back. Third stage, drive the forward stroke out. Now, the most important safety tip of the double spey is when you've completed the first movement, this stage 1, just make sure the fly hasn't gone upstream of you, because if the fly lands on the water upstream of you and you complete the double spey, you'll end up with this. And you imagine what that is with a double hook on the end. So you can see how vitally important it is to complete the first movement of the double spey and ensure that the fly lands on your downstream shoulder. Then you can complete the second movement, and then you can complete the third movement. Now, with a stage 2, the second part that we're going to look at, remember we're trying to get as big a belly behind as possible to load the rod, and that is formed by an acceleration of the rod, not here, but what we call a kick, from here to there, and it throws behind you a bigger belly. Now, we've already discussed the merits of a big belly, and if you've got the room behind you, then the big belly will go out better than anything else, but if you haven't got the room, be careful on that. So stage 1, over your head and down, keep the rod low, come round on 2, throw the belly behind you, and stage 3, the forward stroke, is just a gentle forward tap. And perhaps the most important point with stage 2 is never dip the rod. And I'll show you what happens and what that means. If you stop the rod here, quite high, and come round on stage 2 and dip the rod to the water, A, you create stick, B, you pull the line into you. And you don't want either of those. You certainly don't want the line into you, and of course if you create stick, the cast is going to go nowhere. So stage 1, make sure the rod is low, coming round, gradually lifting, a nice little kick to get the belly, and then tap to drive the forward stroke out. When you're doing stage 2, what you've got to do is create enough energy to tear the line out of the water which you've made land. And this is the white mouse. This is a term we give to it, which is the spray of line, like a little mouse running downstream, and that shows you what's happening. It shows you that the line is tearing out of the water. And you've got to judge that pretty finely, because if you put the white mouse in too hard, in sort of more like a white rat than a mouse, the thing will fly into the bushes behind you and you'll lose it in the trees. And if you do a little baby, incy-wincy, tiny wee mouse and sort of skittles along like that, it goes nowhere, and you have a very small belly. So the white mouse is fairly critical. It's the amount of speed you use, bringing the rod tip round on this second movement, tearing the line out of the water, getting a big spray. It shows the line's coming out of the water, and if you judge it to the right to the end, what happens is all the line picks up, turns direction, becomes belly. And with a belly that kind of size, it's going to fly out across the water. And the last point, as I said, there's 3 main points to the double spey. The timing of the kick. If you kick your belly back here, wait too long, the belly falls in the water, there's no way it's going to go out the water because you've got all that stick. So you've got to be able to get the timing right. Come round, kick the belly back, tap it once the belly is formed and tightened behind you.